Hey everyone, welcome back to Threaducation. Today I want to talk a bit about Bentgablenits. So if you haven't heard of Bentgablenits, it's essentially a bespoke DIY brand based in Toronto. To give you a bit of background, the brand is founded and run by three partners: Brenda Bent, Gable, and Angelo Nitsopolous, hence the name Bentgablenits. And even though it's only been active for about a year and a half at this point, they've already amassed a really strong cult following. That being said, in this video I want to take a look at the brand's roots, some of the work they've done, and where things might be headed in the future. So let's start off with Brenda Bent and Gable. The two of them worked in the fashion industry during the 80s and 90s, and after that they opened an interior design studio together called Bent Gable Design, through which they've designed a number of commercial and residential spaces throughout Toronto. So Brenda and Karen obviously have an eye for design as well as a long history of working together. So how did Angelo Nitsopolous, better known as Nits, come into the picture? To answer that, let's backtrack a little bit. Brenda Bent, one of the founding partners of Bentgablenits, has three sons: Levi Bentley, Kai Bentley, and Jet Bentley. Brenda works in the fashion industry, so it should come as no surprise that all three of her sons are into fashion themselves. And actually, all three of them have their own YouTube channels where they often talk about fashion in one way or another. I'll note here that Levi actually runs a brand of his own called Trinity, and Kai runs a brand of his own called Strawberry Jams. I'll link both of them in the description so you can check them out. Overall, their aesthetic is really a blend of streetwear, luxury, and vintage fashion, much like Bentgablenits is, and that's no coincidence because Brenda Bent's sons actually helped introduce Nits into the world of fashion. Growing up in Toronto, Nits became friends with the Bentley brothers, and since they were already into fashion, the more he hung out with them, the more he started getting interested in fashion himself. And like many people, he started out by collecting brands like Supreme and Fear of God. Over the next few years, he developed an insane streetwear collection, and this helped him build a social media following as he regularly posts fits on Instagram wearing incredibly rare pieces. As it often does, this interest in streetwear eventually transitioned into an interest in higher fashion. This included a newfound love for Japanese brands like Capital and Visvim. I'll add that Nits has always maintained a bit of the vintage sportswear aesthetic in his look, and that's something that's obviously influenced his work at Bentgablenits. So fast forward to 2019, and Nits was over at the Bentley brothers' house when he saw Brenda Bent designing something for a friend. She was using rope and stitching to rework some clothes, and Nits instantly had the idea that they should try doing the same thing with vintage Nike pieces. Nits started by going to local vintage shops in Toronto and finding pieces that they could rework. Brenda Bent and Gable then took the pieces and did a lot of the technical work, including stitching on velvet patches and adding the trimming. This turned out to be a really effective partnership because Nits is very tapped into the modern fashion industry and knows what designs people want, and Brenda and Karen have the skills to make it all happen, not to mention they add a bit of influence from 80s and 90s fashion. The end result was a product that's reminiscent of streetwear, vintage sportswear, and I'd say even a bit of Japanese fashion, all of which makes sense because that perfectly matches Nits' personal style. You can see here some of Bentgablenits' earlier pieces, much of which is reworked vintage Nike. And more recently, they've been moving towards more original pieces like varsity jackets, sweatpants and crew necks, and flannels. Nits has said that Nike has been supportive of the work they've done and that they would someday like to collaborate with them formally. But for now, I personally really like seeing them branching out and trying new things like this because it proves how strong their design language is. Bentgablenits has become very popular in a short amount of time, and that's in large part thanks to support from some pretty major celebrities. Early adopters of the brand have included Madison Beer, Evan Mock, and fellow Toronto native Drake. In August of 2020, they also had a pop-up event at Selfridges in London, which was another major step for the brand. Even with all of this success, Bentgablenits is pretty new to the fashion scene, and that's why they're a brand I'm recommending everybody watches for in the next few years. Now, I obviously don't mean to compare the two aesthetically, but in a roundabout way, Bentgablenits kind of reminds me of Chrome Hearts, because they have very recognizable signature design elements that can basically be applied to anything and everything. Speaking of which, I personally really like to see Bentgablenits expand further into things like denim wear and accessories, because those are two areas I can see them being very good at. I'm sure they're working on a lot of new things right now, so I'll definitely be on the lookout. And that's basically everything I wanted to cover in this video. Like I said, Bentgablenits is relatively new, so I just wanted to give the best overview of their history and their work that I can. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe because I'll be doing more videos like this in the future where I talk about upcoming brands that I enjoy. Other than that, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.